Hello, welcome to Cordial Couture. My name is Judith, and for those of you who are new to the channel, I purchased the Lutterloh system last fall, and on my channel right now I am sharing my journey with the Lutterloh system and showing the different projects that I'm making with the kit. Today we're going to be making a blouse. It's blouse number 61, this one here. That is from the classic kit number 6. There's a decorative element on the front. There are 3/4 length sleeves in which there's a slit for the button. So we're going to learn how to do that today. To make my blouse, I've chosen this fabric here, which is ivory and black. Slightly see-through, but not too much. It's a rather light fabric. And I purchased it last summer at Club Tissu, but I don't remember the type of fabric. So that's what I'm going to use to make the blouse. I'm going to change my camera and we will look at the pattern together. So this is the blouse we're looking at today. If we look at it, it's pattern 61, and then means that's the blouse, and this is your approximate fabric quantity. Then you do have to adjust it based on your size, and it comes from this booklet here, number 6. If we zoom in a bit here to look at the details, we see that it's a round collar, and that the decorative detail is in the front here. The sleeve is slightly off the shoulder. It's not finishing here, it's just off the shoulder. And then you've got your gathered sleeve here with a sleeve cuff, and you flick on the other side, the sleeve cuff has a button and it has an opening here. So let's turn this around and look at our pattern. This is pattern 61. Here's our sleeve. So you're going to trace the sleeve here, slightly curved here. You've got a squiggly line, which means that we're going to gather the bottom of the sleeve. This means it's the front, and it's important to indicate that on your sleeve to make sure you put the right sleeve on the right side of the shirt. And here you've got that little line here, which you have to trace as well, because that's the center of your sleeve, and that has to line up with your shoulder seam. The straight of grain is here. What you can do to do the straight of grain is draw a line straight from here to here, and then you can just do a perpendicular line and draw your straight of grain. Here we have the slit for the opening of your sleeve, and there's letter D here. So if you come down here and we look at this, it says EF, and if you look at EF here, it says sleeve cuff, so the two together. So your sleeve cuff, you're going to cut 2 out. It's approximately 32 centimeters, and that depends on the measure of your forearm. But don't forget that here, if we look at the pattern, it's a 3/4 length sleeve, and there's ease here, because if you fold your arm here, your sleeve's going to go up, and you need to have enough room so that it doesn't pull on you. So leave enough room. Don't measure it here, but measure it more maybe up here to have a bit more room. Then we have what here? We have the straight of grain in this direction. It's going to be lined. You do have a button here. That means you have a buttonhole on this side, and this is where your D comes in. So what it's telling you is that your sleeve, when you finish it, it's going to start here, go around, and finish here. You're not going to line up the seams with the seam here. It really has to be here at the opening. So that's the sleeve. The next piece is the back, so B is the back. We have the collar here, the shoulder. We have a dashed line, which means that the pattern piece is going to be placed on the fold of the fabric, so there's no seam in the middle, in the back. You have a waistline here, so don't forget this is top. So anything from here all the way to here is going to be using your bust measurement, and from your waist, because there's a dart on the waist, all the way down is the waist measurement. And it's important because if you look at your shirt, this is a long shirt, so it's going to go over your hips. So you have to make sure that you're using the hip measurement for the bottom part. Unless, of course, you're making it shorter, you don't want it that long, then the hip measurement isn't as important. But it is, if you are doing the full length, please use the hip. Here's your A. Before we go into the front, let's look at the technical detail, design here for the back of the shirt. So you do see that there's no seam on the back, which it confirms the dashed line here. You've got the collar, which shows a line, which means that your decorative collar here is going to be joined here in the back middle. So it's going to be important to identify your middle back here when you do your pattern. Then you have your sleeves, you see the gathers, and you see that the slit is in the middle of the back of the sleeve like this. It's not on the side or up here, it's really here, and so is your button. So you're going to have to make sure that the placement of your sleeve is accurate when you do that. If we move on to the front, shoulder, armhole, here we have a dart, a bust dart. Then again, this is the waistline, so from here to here is the bust measurement, from here to here is the hip measurement. Straight of grain again, I use the bottom and with the perpendicular line, and then you have your facing here that goes all the way down here. The last piece is your decorative collar, so it's like a squiggly line with a straight line. This is HM, which means back middle, so that confirms this drawing here, which has to line up here. So you're going to draw all these little dots here, and that's going to give you this shape. Make sure that as you draw that it's really the same width, all the way down. So I think mine is about 3 centimeters, and this says front middle, so it's going to line up with the front middle here. And I wasn't sure when I saw the drawing if, just looking at this, if the collar was just hooked up to here and then this was loose, because it seems loose down here. But they do clearly call out that there's a C here and a C here, so that is hooked up all the way down to the bottom of the shirt. So that's something to draw out. So what I'm going to do now is just show you a few of my pattern pieces that I did make adjustments to, so you can see what I did, and then we will go on to the garment construction. In terms of pattern adjustment, what I did was, here if you look at the picture, the neckline is rather low, and given that I'm tall, I prefer to have it a bit higher up because I often have to bend over and I prefer not having such a low neckline. So what I did was on my front pattern, here's my original where the V ended, the neckline. I moved it up 1.5 inches, and then I just scooted over here and get back to the original line, and then I adjusted my seam allowance. Because I did that, then I also had to change the lining to match. So I did the same adjustment for my lining. And then on top of that, it's these pattern pieces here, the curved pattern pieces. So I had to also raise the line of my pattern piece from here and went up to here. So I made it straight, and then I started the curve. I'm hoping it works. And also because the, not related to the adjustment, but if you look at this fabric, you'd see both sides of this decorative piece. And on the pattern it says to line it with interfacing. It really depends on the kind of fabric you have. What I'm going to do is I'm not going to use interfacing, but I am going to use 2 layers of my fabric. So in order to do that and have it flow properly is that I have one on this way, and then my other fabric, when I cut out the 2 other pieces, I had to do it in opposite sides. So I don't know if you can see, they sort of look like that. Okay, so if you're going to cut 4, don't cut 4 out in the same way. Make sure you cut them out in the opposite way so that you'd have the right sides that are opposite. Anyways, I hope that's going to work. So now let's move on to the garment construction. Okay, so the first step in making the blouse, this is the front piece of the blouse, is to sew the dart and then press the dart downwards. So we're going to do that on both sides of the front pieces, and we'll be back. It's my dart that's sewn and pressed downwards, and I did also press it on this side, so that's what it looks like on the right side. The next step is to take your back piece and put the right side up. You notice that I did put a little snip here to indicate the back dart, the middle back, sorry. What you're going to take is each front part here, just maybe zoom out a bit here. Am I zoomed out? So there's my shoulder, one side of the shoulder. I'm going to take my front piece, and I'm going to put it right sides together. Going to line up your shoulders here, and you're going to pin that, sew it, open it flat, iron it, and then finish off the shoulder seam. So that's what we're doing in the next step. So here are the shoulders that are sewn, and that's what it looks like on the right side. The reason why I say to press before you overlock, because you could have overlocked closed as well if you wanted to, is that when you press your seams like this, it really sets in the seam and it gives it a professional look. If you press after you overlock like this, it doesn't give the same result. So the next step is to sew the sides. So you take from the bottom of the armhole here, pin all this together along all the way down to the bottom. So we're going to pin that, going to sew it, we're going to press it open, and then finish off the seam. So that's the next step. Okay, so we've sewn the side seams. I sewed the side seams together like this. That's what it looks like. The next part is the facings. So I have my 3 facings here. I'm not doing the part right now with the curve, right? Just the facings. What I like to do, I showed the method I think in an earlier video, and I put the link on the method. I think it comes from the Pattern Scout. This is the right side. This is the non-sticky side. You're putting right side with non-sticky side together, and we're going to sew the bottom here only, down here with your seam allowance. Trim the seam allowance, and then we'll turn it over. Same thing with these front facings. This is the right side, this is the non-sticky side, so the sticky side is on the outside. We're going to sew along the outside seam here all the way along. Same thing for this one here on the outside. So we'll be back after this. So here's one of the long pieces. I've trimmed off the seam allowance here. So the next step is to take your fabric and just fold it over like this. Hold on, I'll do it this way. So that your interfacing is just on the line, and you're going to finger press that just to get that in place. And then you're going to steam this so that it stays there. So I'll just do it a little bit, and then I'll do the rest off camera. So you do it like that, and just keep going all the way along. So I'll do this one, the other piece, and then this is the round piece. You're also going to cut there. I'll be back after that's done. Right, so that what you should have is one long piece like this that's got interfacing on one side, the opposite equivalent here, like this, and then you have the back of the collar like this. So the next step that I'm going to do is I'm going to sew this one here, like this. And sew this one like this. Did I get that right? Let's see. This goes out like this. Yes, I believe that's right. So the finished, no, actually that's wrong. It should be like this. So you sew that like this. So the curved sides, all the finished sides are together. So this is finished, and that's finished, and these are all the unfinished edges on the inside. So let's go sew these together. Then we're going to overlock, press, and come back for the next part. Okay, so here's the finished result. So I've sewn them together, and that's what it looks like on the other side. So the next step is to take the decorative flounce. So we're going to take both pieces, and what we're going to do is we're going to do the same concept as with the interfacing, is that we're going to sew along the outside edges here. So we have right sides together. We're going to sew all along on both sides of the outer edge. We're going to turn them around, and then we'll have the right sides ready. So again, we're sewing on the outside edges along both sides. Okay, so I've sewn both sides, right sides together. Here I've trimmed my seam allowance. So the next step is to turn this right sides out and to really press so that the seam ends up on the side like this. So you're going to finger press and then press with your iron so that you have a nice decorative here element with all that folded properly. So I will go do this, and we will be right back. So here are my two finished pieces. As I was ironing, I realized that it would probably become an ironing nightmare when I washed my blouse because I didn't put any interfacing in here, so it's going to move around a lot on these sides. So what I did is I decided to put in a row of stitching here along to keep my seam allowances in the right spot, so at least it'll be easier to iron when I wash my blouse. So the next step is to put all of this front part together. So I'm going to grab my blouse and I'll be right back. Okay, so I'm back to sewing, and the last time when we left each other, that I just finished sewing a row of stitching like this. And then this is the two middle back pieces, and I was going to sew them like this. And then I said that's not going to be very pretty underneath. So what I did is I unstitched my this sewing here for a little bit so that I can open this up. Going to open up the two back middle pieces like this. Going to line them up with the center seam, and I'm going to sew them together on the inside like this. So a sewing line here along my stitch line, so that when it's finished the seam is going to be on the inside and you won't see it on the outside. So that's what I'm going to do next. And on the same piece here, I realized also that this at the bottom of this piece is the bottom of the garment, so I do need to finish my seam, so I turned them inside like this. Going to sew that so that when it's finished it'll be finished like this, so there's no raw edge. So I'll do that on both pieces and I'll be right back. So here's my middle back sewn together with the seam allowance. I'm going to cut off the seam allowance and turn this to the right side, pressing it all, and then just finishing back my stitching here. So that will be the back. And then for the edges, I didn't give you the right information when I got to the sewing machine. I said that doesn't work. I had to flip this inside out. You don't flip it out. You just line up the two and then sew to your seam allowance. And then I'll cut this off here in a couple minutes. Turn this inside out and you'll have a nice finished edge. So I'm going to just finish that off, and we're going to start putting this together with the main garment. Next step is to put the different pieces together on the main bodice part. So this is my main bodice part. This is the right side, so this is the inside of the blouse. It's hard to see with the pattern I have, but this is on the right side. And I've thought a lot about in what order do I attach it, because I have both the facing. The facing will go on the inside like this. And then we have this piece here that goes on the outside. So how do you do it so that the finishes on the inside work? So I've thought about it. I think I've come up with the right method. So we're going to start by, this is the right side of the garment. I'm going to take the piece that goes on the outside. I'm going to line up the center back with the center back here, and I'm going to pin it right sides like this all the way along so that this matches. Hopefully it all matches. We'll see. So I'm going to start by pinning that so that I've got the raw edges together like that. So I'm going to do that and we'll be back. Okay, so here I have my garment right sides facing. It's hard to see what here is the finished side of the garment, the decorative band, and here are the raw edges pinned together. And what I am going to do, and I hope this works, is that I'm going to sew from the very bottom all the way around, just inside my seam allowance, because I have other sewing. We have the facing to put in there too. So I'm just going to sew, and I'm not going to trim my seam allowance this time. So I'm just going to sew all the way around, and then we'll come back. Okay, so here I have my decorative trim here, sewn right sides. And the next thing is I'm going to put my shirt right sides together. And I'm going to pin from the bottom down here all the way to where the neckline, the V starts here. Going to pin all the way down, and I'm going to sew from here all the way down, and I'm not again going to trim my seam allowances at this step. Okay, so here's the front of the shirt sewn together, and I really started sewing here, not I didn't start there, right where the V ends, and all the way down. If we turn the shirt to the right side, it's a good time to go try on your shirt too, just to make sure before we start adding the other pieces. So here we have on the front side, we have our decorative element here. So next step is I would come and press this open all along so that it lays flat. And then what I'm going to do, I think it's the right thing, we'll find out, is I'm going to take the lining, the interfacing, sorry. I did identify here my middle back, and I'm going to come here and put my middle back so that the lining, the interfacing here is on the outside. So line up the center backs. I'm going to come pin around. I'm going to do this just a bit longer, but it's worth seeing me pin the whole thing here. So I'm going to pin until it lines up here in the middle front. So it's going to be important that we really pin that up here. And I'm doing this quickly, but I'll come back and pin it properly afterwards, but just to give you an idea. So I'll do that on the other side too. I don't know how to add music to my videos to make this a bit less boring when you see me pin, but that's... So here, let's say this ends up here. So what I'm thinking here is that I'm going to start sewing right on the seam here. And then I'm going to sew all of the way around, right back to the seam. It's important that the seams line up, and I might sew just a little bit here, up to here. And then what it's going to do is we're going to turn this inside out. And then the finishings on the inside will all be inside encased, right? So that way, and then we'll finish it off and then bring these guys in and sew along the back. So that's my thought of what I'm going to do. So I'm going to just pin this properly, do that sewing, and I'll be right back. Okay, so I ended up starting to sew just a little bit here so that the two pieces would stay before I started sewing. And instead of starting to sew down here, I started at the center back so that my stitches wouldn't finish there. I wouldn't have too much going on. So my next step is going to be cutting the seam allowance here, turning the facing on the inside like this, pressing it, and then understitching the facing as well. So I'm going to do that and show you what it looks like. Okay, so here is the sorry, I'm losing my words, the lining inside here, and I did cut the seam allowance and I sewed towards the side of the facing. So now the facing lays flat, but I did take precautions. So here on the shoulder seams below underneath the decorative flap here, I did sew within the seam so that it would stay in place, and on both sides. And on the back of the collar here, I also sewed here so that would stay in place. So the next part is the remaining two flaps. I unsewed the part that I had sewn ahead of time to do the first part. So now I'm going to take one flap. My seam is pressed open like this. I'm going to take one flap and pin it along one side of the seam all the way down. And so on that side of the seam, then I'm going to do the same thing with the other flap. Here, I'm going to pin it on the other side of the seam and sew all the way down, and then we'll turn those right sides, press it, and that should be finished, and we'll move on to the sleeves. Okay, so what I just told you a few minutes ago was not a good idea. It did not give me good results, so I unsewed everything, and what I'm going to do now is I just pinned the two pieces right sides together, not attached to the blouse, and I'm going to sew along here on the unfinished edge. I'm going to press the seams open, and that'll give me a nice result here, and then I will probably hand stitch that to the blouse. So I will go sew that and I'll be back. Okay, so we're now onto the sleeve. Just remember to really identify your middle on the top here. And I also, you probably can't see it, but on this side I have a V that says it's the front. And I've cut my slit. So on each sleeve here I have my slit. And the first thing we're going to do is finish this slit here. I found a video that explains how to do that. I will put it in the description below. But basically that requires bias binding, which I do not have in this color, so I'm going to have to make it out of the same fabric here. I've never made bias tape before, so we're going to learn this together. So I have I took out my cutting mat, I have my rotary cutter here, and I found this thing that a friend gave me a while ago, so I think I can fold the bias tape with the iron on this. So I will just set up my fabric to cut the bias tape, and I'll be right back. Okay, so here I'm set up to cut my bias tape based on my mat. I understand if I cut from here to there, that's a 45-degree angle. In watching the video, it says it takes 3/8 of an inch, which I calculate is equal to 1 centimeter. So I need 1 centimeter both sides plus in the back. So I'm going to cut a 4 centimeter strip. My slit is 8 times 2, which is 16. I'm going to give myself a bit of room, so let's say 20 centimeters per sleeve. So that's a total of 40 centimeters. I think I can do that in one 4 centimeter strip. So I'll cut it out, and I'll use that little tool to fold it with my iron, and I'll meet you back to set it up on the sleeve. Okay, so I made my bias tape. I didn't use the tool. It was too complicated, and I didn't have the time to learn it today. So I just basically folded my bias tape into like this, ironed it to find the middle, then I folded the two pieces to match, and then again ironed it so that it gives you bias tape like this, and then I pinned it to my sleeve. This is the right side of the sleeve. I'm going to sew on the right side so that try to get as even a stitching as possible on the edge here. So I'll go do that for both sleeves, and I'll be back. Okay, so here I've just finished sewing the bias on the sleeve, and as in the video, I did a little diagonal stitch line here so that when you fold this over, you've got a nice finish like this. The next step I'm going to do is I'm going to put my sleeves right sides together, and I'm going to sew the sides of the sleeves, so from here all the way down here on both, and then I will serge them finished. So I'll go do that, and I'll be back. Okay, so here we have our side seams sewn, finished with the overlock. The next step is to sew a gathering stitch. So we're going to sew from this rounded part here around to the other side. We're going to use the longest stitch on our machine, and we're going to leave our thread tails long so that we can pull on them. So we're going to sew within, outside here, right close to the edge, within the seam allowance, one row of stitching, and just below it another one, but always within the seam allowance. So I'll go do that, and I'll be back. Okay, so I've put the gathering stitches in my sleeve cap, and I've gathered them, so it looks like this. There's a bit of gathers. I've turned my sleeve right side out, so this is the right side of the sleeve. This is the blouse itself. This is the wrong side. You see the seam allowances up here. I'm going to put the sleeve right side into the armhole. And I'm going to come line up, hold on, the middle sleeve here with this seam allowance. So these two seam allowances have to be lined up down here. And you have to make sure when you're putting in your sleeve that you've got, here I've got, you can't really see it, but I've got my pink V, which is the front, and this is the front of the blouse. So I've got the right sleeve here. Just tuck this back in. The other place you have to line up is your top shoulder. So right here, this here has to line up with the center of your cap of your sleeve. And I had put I had cut, I have to find it here. Here's my slit here that identifies the top, the center of the sleeve. So I'm going to line these two up and pin that together. And I'm going to start from the bottom of the sleeve here. There's no gathering down here, so I'm going to pin it as is. And once the gathering starts, I'm going to pull on the gathering until it fits the sleeve and make sure that the gathers are evenly distributed like this. Oops. And then I'm going to pin that together. Okay, and you're going to do the same thing with the back. Then we're going to come and sew all along the armhole and finish it with the overlocker. So let's go do that. So this is the finished sleeve. I've overlocked it. From the outside it looks like this. So we're almost finished. What we have to do now is put the sleeve cuff. So I am going to go calculate my sleeve cuff, which is, if we remember, the sleeve comes about here on the forearm. So you need to allow for movement, so you need to put a certain amount of ease. So I'll go calculate that, cut out my piece, put the interfacing on it, and get it prepared so that we're ready to work with it. So we're going to then gather this here, put on the sleeve cuff, so that's the next step. And then we're going to have to do a buttonhole, put a button, because there is a button on this sleeve. And the last step will be to finish the bottom of the shirt. So I'll go prepare that and I'll be back. So here are my two cuffs that I've cut out. I've put interfacing on them. The next step is I'm going to fold the seam allowance towards the inside on both ends. I'm going to press them and I'll be back to show you the next step. Here are the seam allowances that are folded towards the inside. The next step is to fold right sides together with the seam allowances folded like this. We're going to pin at each end. Same thing here. And we're going to come and do a stitch line here with your seam allowance and a stitch line at the other end here with the seam allowance. So I'll be right back. So here I've sewn at each end. So the next step is to really cut the seam allowance and then cut into just before the seam as a corner like that. You're going to do that on both ends. Then you're going to turn it inside out. Make sure your corners are nice and square. And then you're going to press it so that it stays like this. So that's the next step. So if you remember the pattern correctly, there was gathering here on the bottom of the sleeve. So the next step is to go put in 2 rows of gathering stitches. So the longest stitch length you have, and leave the thread trails. So we're going to gather from here to here, and we'll be back to put on the cuffs. So here is the bottom of my sleeve that is gathered. I didn't actually need to gather that much, but the next step is to take your cuff here and come place it along your sleeve so that it goes all the way to the other end here. It's important not to put your sleeve all the way into the bottom here, just where you have your seam allowance that's folded over as such, because don't forget we have to put a buttonhole here, and if you've got your sleeve all the way to the bottom, it's going to be hard to do your buttonhole. So just tuck it in just within the seam allowance and go all the way around. And you might want to calculate ahead of time, but I took out most of my gathering. Here's what it looks like pinned on the other sleeve, so there's almost no gathering. And what I'm going to do is I'll probably sew from the top, so I'll have to put my pins on the other side, but sew from the top and just sew really close here to have a nice even stitch. So I will go do that and I'll be back. Here are the cuffs sewn to the sleeve. So the next step is to go do the buttonhole. Here is the button I've chosen, just a simple off-white button. So I need to go do the buttonhole on both sleeves, and I will be back. But I also did, while I was at the sewing machine, I did finish the bottom of the shirt, so I just folded it in twice, the seam allowance, and just sewed a straight line. You could have also chosen to do an overlock and just fold it once, but this is the method I chose for today. So I will go do my buttonhole and I will be back. So there you have the finished garment. I'm really pleased with the result. This time I really took into consideration the inside finishing of the blouse, and I think that I really improved on that set of skills because I didn't necessarily take that into account in my previous video. So now I think that I've got my blouse is as well done on the inside, well finished on the inside as it is on the outside. So I'm really happy about that element. We did learn different things, how to make a bias, how to do the arm slit as well. So if you like this video, I encourage you to subscribe and to like it. And the fact that you like it, I believe it helps others be notified, or if they're using the Lutterloh system, and they can see the video and learn from it as well. Since my last video, I've had a few requests. So one of the requests was that I put the supplement number and the pattern number on my videos. So I found out how to locate that within my 2023 kit. So at this video going forward, you'll have both the supplement number and the pattern number on the little picture, as well as in the title of the video. And I've also been asked to include the pattern tracing, the pattern adjustments, and sewing at the machine. So in my next videos going forward, I'll start incorporating parts of those within the different videos. I might not do all 3 of them every video, but I'll include some of those in the next videos. I told you that I would alternate between a top and a blouse, a pants. So the next I'll be using this classic kit here, and I'll be using these pants here. So these are the pants I'll be doing, and I believe this is in the classic kit, it's number 54, and I'll get you the pattern number, the supplement number eventually, but I believe it's also available in the extra large kit. So if you have the extra large kit, I believe this is in one of the collections. So I'll see you next time. Thank you.